Welcome to Namod Book Week.
Or Namod Book Afternoon, anyway. This is an event in solidarity with Palestinian human rights and Palestinian cultural expression.
We have a fantastic lineup. Thanks for the speakers who've given their time and everyone who's put a huge amount of work into making this happen. This is streaming live on YouTube because we sold every ticket and there's an overflow room downstairs.
We've got lots of fantastic writers speaking, and we're going to cut them off shamelessly, so we've got space for the other great writers. We've emailed their biographies to save money and time. There's also one between two on the chairs in front of you.
We're raising funds for two worthwhile causes, the Educational Bookshop and the Hanoon Foundation. You'll be hearing more about their work later on.
You can also donate via QR code on the walls all around. And the Hanoon Bookshop is providing a stall, which means that you'll be able to buy the work by all the writers today, both during the interval, which will be about 4:30, and afterwards.
We hope you'll stay in the bar area after the event to continue the conversation informally after the readings finish. Ramadan Kareem to everyone observing. There are dates and water in the cafe open, we'll put them out in a little bit for anyone who's breaking their fast while the event draws to a close.
The idea for this event began in response to the raid on the Educational Bookshop in Jerusalem 3 weeks ago. It's now become an event about resisting the attempt to silence Palestinian voices and erase Palestinian cultures.
It's also a chance for Namod to show the diversity among Jews in the UK on this issue, in contrast to the ways in which we're often represented.
We hope this will be the first of many. Now, our first speaker, author and journalist Matthew Teller, will talk about the Educational Bookshop.
Thank you very, very much indeed. I am not going to talk first about the Educational Bookshop. I'm going to play you a message from the Educational Bookshop, which arrived about 2 hours ago from Mahmoud, who is the first speaker, and then Ahmed, his nephew, and then Mahmoud finishes. This is about 4 minutes long.
Good afternoon. This is Mahmoud Muna, and I'm here in my house, in my living room, on day 20 of the restrictions that has been imposed on us since leaving custody 20 days ago. It's actually a bittersweet moment. In a way, we're finishing these unjust restrictions that has been imposed on us, but in a way we are very happy because tomorrow is the ending of these restrictions and we'll be able to go back to the bookshop, the place in which I have personally spent the last 40 years of my life in. I'm looking forward to go back to my community, to go back to my shelves and my books and to my good conversations with my community. I would like to thank all the people around the world who have helped us. Particularly at this point, I would like to thanks the book industry, the writers, the authors, people who have really believed in the power of the words and in the importance of literature to liberate and to inspire and to create imaginations.
Good evening. This is Ahmed. I am also here at home in Jerusalem. I want to start by thanking everybody who have came to help, to support, to stand in solidarity. We have actually received messages, emails from all corners of the world. Everybody who we have met over the years have been in touch. So we really very much thank all of the solidarity, and we see how this is all a community that is coming all together. I want to highlight also that a topic that's often not spoken about when it comes to the books, to talking about this issue, is the 2 days that we have spent in custody. Mahmoud and I have went through a horrendous experience. We've experienced being in prison and jail with very minimum rights, with a lot of brutality and aggression. And it makes you wonder how many innocent people also have to go through this process. We're lucky to have a community stand behind us. We have lucky to have so many people from the world who came to stand in solidarity, but it's really something that requires and needs us to think about and to keep these people in our mind. It's also not surprising that the bookshops are being basically attacked or harassed in that sense. Books and literature are a very important tool in changing societies, in promoting social change, political change. And we have seen that this have also become a bookshop, and booksellers have also become a target in a way for to limit people's freedom and freedom of speech.
Thank you, Mahmoud, for staging this event, for bringing this wider community in London and beyond. Thank you very much for all those on the panel who will be speaking and who already spoke. We are sorry that we're not with you, but we are with you in heart and in mind. Thank you very much. Both of us, we look forward to see you in Jerusalem or somewhere else. Do please continue to speak truth to power. Do continue, please, to inspire. Do continue, please, to support not just the Educational Bookshop in Jerusalem, but all those bookstores around the world, all those free thinkers, all those people who are trying to bring some goodness to a society at a time when we need so much change. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Amazing. Palestine. Palestine's not my country, and it never will be my country. I am a fourth-generation immigrant to Britain. All 8 of my great-grandparents arrived here between 1887 and 1913, and all 8 of them were Jewish. Many Palestinians, and I'm sure many people in this room today as well, cannot visit Palestine because of the passport I hold, British, because of my skin color, because of the fact that I was born into the religion that I was born into. I'm very lucky to have visited Palestine dozens of times, or hundreds of times, since I was a child. The only foreign holidays that we ever took when I was growing up were to Israel. When I was 13, my father arranged for me to have my bar mitzvah twice. Once at the synagogue that we went to at home in South London, in Croydon, and again at the Western Wall in Jerusalem. Israel, as a force for good, filled the first 20 years of my life. The next 20, thanks again to my passport and to my skin color and to the bundle of privileges that come along with that, I was able to move around. I lived in Cairo, I lived in Amman, I traveled through Syria and Saudi Arabia and the Gulf. I visited Sabra and Shatila in Beirut and all over Palestine, listening to new stories or listening to new ways of telling the stories that I thought I already understood. Slowly grasping the scale of the injustice that had been committed, ostensibly in my name and for my benefit. And then I started writing about it. 3 weeks ago, to the day, I got a call from a friend in Jordan, Juliet Touma. Juliet leads communications for UNRWA, but she also helped edit and was one of the inspirations for this book, Daybreak in Gaza. She asked me when I had last been in touch with Mahmoud. I'm lucky to have known Mahmoud for years. Any writer, any reader, anyone who has any connection with books of any kind, or media, or study, who happens to pass through Jerusalem knows Mahmoud because of the bookshop that he runs, which is literally, I mean, he'll excuse me if he's watching on YouTube, literally the best bookshop in the world for the Middle East. Nowhere else, not in London, not in New York, certainly not at the moment in New York anyway, can you find as comprehensive a range of books on Israel and Palestine as you can there. And Mahmoud is able to talk to you in detail about every single one. For the last year, Mahmoud and I have spoken pretty much every day, working on this book. last autumn, we spent, give or take, 6 weeks traveling together 24/7, doing a book tour around the UK and around Europe as well, speaking at public events. I looked at my phone and I checked when I'd last spoken to him, and I told Juliet that I'd last spoken to him 2 or 3 days previously. And then she said that she had heard just then from the Brazilian ambassador to Palestine, who had been called by the Mexican ambassador to Palestine, who was saying that there were rumors that Mahmoud had been arrested. I tried Mahmoud's number, he didn't pick up. Then I called his wife, and she confirmed that Israeli police had raided the bookshop that afternoon and taken Mahmoud and Ahmed, the two that we heard speaking before, away. The period that followed was horrendous. There were hundreds upon hundreds of messages of support and solidarity as we were scrambling to try and make sense of the situation, to try and get some communication to and from. There was the shock of the TV pictures, seeing Mahmoud and Ahmed bewildered and handcuffed, being dragged into the court. Circles of friends gathered to support them from around the world. Publishers and colleagues started activating solidarity networks. Ahmad also activated its own solidarity network as well. It was non-stop. You know the details of what happened. As you've heard, Mahmoud, thankfully, and Ahmed both are okay. And tomorrow they'll be able to go back to the bookshop after 2 days in jail, 5 days of house arrest, and 20 days of a ban on them going anywhere near the bookshop at all. For him, Mahmoud, and for me, and I would imagine for most of us in this room, the last year has been a bit of a life changer for all sorts of reasons. I just want to say, I'll be brief because I know there's hundreds of people, dozens of people behind me waiting to come on. I do want to say a few words about what the people of Palestine, and especially Gaza, have taught me, even as they were facing genocidal violence from the Israeli state. 2 quotes matter here, and they're both, I'm sorry, from very familiar sources. One is the Palestinian-American academic Edward Said, and the other is the Palestinian national poet Mahmoud Darwish, who wrote in 2002, in a very beautiful, longer poem, this is a tiny extract called Under Siege. Here, on the slopes of hills, facing the dusk and the cannon of time, close to the gardens of broken shadows, we do what prisoners do and what the jobless do. We cultivate hope. Now, cultivating hope is such a powerful, extraordinarily powerful idea that has sustained me over the last appalling 12 to 18 months. Hope is not something you walk into the supermarket, you go down aisle 17, there's a line of hope, you take hope, you pick it off the shelf, you put it in your pocket, that's hope. And then you're hopeful. It doesn't work like that. Hope has to be cultivated. You have to plant it. You have to nurture it and water it and feed it and encourage it. And if you are able to do that, it will transform, and it will transform you, and it will transform the surroundings as well. Hold on, if you can, to that idea of how the Palestinian people cultivate hope. And then there's Edward Said, and he said, I'm paraphrasing slightly, in a situation of cruelty and injustice, hopelessness is submission, and to submit is immoral. This is another key idea on that book tour, going around speaking to audiences much like this one, live audiences around Europe. So many people in Britain and elsewhere were saying to me, you know, it's hopeless. I'm in despair. I don't know what to do. The situation is terrible. That we can't act. What can we do? The situation it's bleak beyond belief. For Said, and I should say, for pretty much everybody that we spoke to in Gaza and around Gaza for this book, hopelessness is privilege. And it's a privilege that they can't afford. We, in our comfortable homes, with our at least nominally democratic governments, have the choice to be bleak and to be despairing. But others do not. If they want to live, if they want to survive, to think, to create, to build, to feed their kids, because bleakness and despair represent submission to the oppressors. The people of Gaza and of all Palestine have much to teach the world about despair and hope and resilience and courage and how to prevail. And we should be listening to them. I just want to end, please, with one tiny little 10-second message from an extraordinary woman in Gaza whose name is Amani Shaltut. And she looks after the UNRWA, the United Nations Photo Archive in Gaza City. She was displaced. When she recorded this, she sent a longer message. This is 10 seconds of a message that I want you to take with you today.
Many, many thanks for you and for all those who stand in solidarity with Gaza. It's really, really appreciated. And actually, what you are doing is a turning point in history.
Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Matthew. I want to welcome onto the stage writer and lawyer Selma Daba.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you to Namod for organizing this. And I'd also like to send my thanks to the Muna brothers for what they thanked this audience a lot, but I'd like to thank them for all they've done in terms of inspiring us with their intelligence, articulacy, perseverance, courage, and serenity. I'm going to be reading an article which I wrote recently. It's published in Port Magazine. It's called Literature from the Barrel of a Gun, and it's about the role of Palestinian literature in my life. On 28th of August, more than 65 Palestinian filmmakers signed a letter accusing Hollywood of dehumanizing Palestinians on screen for decades, a process that had helped to enable the ongoing genocide and devastation in Gaza. We are told all too frequently that literature and culture generally humanize the other, but cultural production can also prime people to allow for killing en masse. It can reduce people to targets, ungrievable bodies, dispensable others, stripped of history and humanity. When in doubt seems to be the unwritten dictum of Hollywood scriptwriters, just kill an Arab. And they do, over and over, in countless thrillers and action movies. Arabs portrayed in film continue, in the main, to be depicted as nameless, odoriferous, and duplicitous. None more so than the Palestinians, a national identity that for years has been repeatedly and deliberately fused with associations of terrorism. Around 14 million people globally have been characterized year in, year out through projects of cultural distortion as having no individual agency other than to cause harm. They are depicted as devoid of basic needs or desires, such as having jobs or families or falling in love. Instead, Palestinians are portrayed as a distinct species bred to kill innocents, making it, according to this perverse logic, justifiable to kill them before they do so. The heterogeneity of Palestinian existences continues to be flattened and denied. The most it seems to be allowed for in terms of political humanity is that of pitiable victims. As a reader who became a writer, I approached Palestinian literature from an awkward angle. I have an English mother and a Palestinian father, and I grew up in Kuwait, which as a teenager bored the hell out of me. Like many aspiring writers, my portal out of the ignominy of my unprepossessing surroundings was literature. I read only in English, particularly Russian and French classics, admiring works where the female protagonists had power and lovers most. Being Palestinian was nothing special in Kuwait at the time. Around 1 in 4 people in the country fell into that category before 1991, when about 400,000 were expelled. But the unhappiness my father's violent refugee experience brought to aspects of our family life felt, to paraphrase Tolstoy, like a very specific unhappiness, a private and wretched trauma, one that the world should know about but somehow could not be shared. When I moved to England at 16, it became even more of a secret hurt, rarely exposed. The word identity was not in my vocabulary, and my approach to wounds was to not lick them too much. Most Palestinian literature available in English at the time, and I'm talking about the 80s and 90s here, was produced by small publishing houses and consisted of poetry and rather mediocre translations of novels. At that age, I was rarely still enough in myself to be able to give poetry the focus it required. Mahmoud Darwish, the icon of Palestinian poetry, was a name I knew, but I assumed that he belonged to others, like the boys at school who wore keffiyehs. That all changed later when I read Ghassan Kanafani's Men in the Sun, which is a tiny collection of short stories. And in it featured Jaffa, Gaza, Kuwait. I was living in Cairo in my 20s, and I'd already lived and worked in Jerusalem briefly for a human rights organization. In these stories, I found my father's childhood in a house by the sea, expulsions from Palestine in 1948, become multidimensional and palpable, as did the world of the country where I grew up in. Rather than being escapist, literature became a way of discovering my core emotional fiber. It was a route of self-inquiry that was as self-affirmative as it was probative. In recent years, the quality, diversity, and quantity of Palestinian literature available to the English language reader has transformed and expanded beyond recognition. I believe that literature, together with art and films, both documentary and feature, coming from Palestinians in Israel, the occupied West Bank, Jerusalem, Gaza, the Arab world, and the broader diaspora, some of the most exciting, innovative, and challenging work available globally. It comes naturally to Palestinian writers to see the political in the personal, to make the personal political. Moral choices that pit the communal actions against the familial imbue every quotidian interaction. Characters are pressurized by states of siege. Actions have consequences. The stakes are incredibly high. Humor is valued and at stake. Freud, and I'm sure there are people in the room who know Freud better than me, but my understanding is that Freud recognized humor and altruism as the only positive psychic defense mechanisms for dealing with trauma and anxiety. And they abound in the worlds of Palestinian poetry and novels. For humor, I would direct the reader to the work of Mazin Ma'rouf's Jokes for the Gunman and Su'ad Amiri's Sharon and My Mother-in-Law. For altruism, it goes by another name, more one of a generosity of spirit and concern for others. It runs deep in the spirit of every line, with even the grieving, starving survivors of genocide, some of them living through genocide, struggling to find ways to help others. In Don't Look Left, A Diary of a Genocide by Atif Abu Saif, 2024, and Messages from Gaza Now, which was also written during the genocide, accounts by Hossam Mathoun, a playwright in Gaza from the period of the 7th of October 2023. If what we see in Gaza is a rehearsal for the future, as the Colombian president Gustavo Petro stated at a recent UN climate summit, then these are the works that demonstrate how to prepare oneself for coming times. In the past, it was my experience that literature translated from Arabic linguistically, but failed to translate culturally. This was not the translator's error. It was just there are regional variations in taste and behavioral codes. I always sensed that there was a higher degree of tolerance for what is deemed to be sentimental to those coming from a more puritanical Anglo-Saxon cultures, not to mention other variations in cultural norms, for example, with regards to women. Translators and publishers act as gatekeepers to another culture and are sensitive to and influence how people access those cultures. English language, how the English language reader is exposed to the subject. And these things are subject to fashion. And some of these trends, such as the saving Muslim women genre, are now dated and dismissed. Kudos should be given to the initiatives like Arablit, which I would recommend you look up, and translators like Marsha Lynx Quayle, Wenqing Ouyang, Alice Guthrie, Yasmin Seal, Catherine Halls, and others for pushing back on patronizing, politically motivated demands of publishers for veiled covered women on their covers, opening pathways for new voices and realities to come to the fore. When it comes to literary styles, there is no defining form in Palestinian literature. It's an eclectic, absorptive mixture of languages and global sources of inspiration. The Palestinian cause is an anti-apartheid quest for liberation. The post-Nakba trend, particularly in the 60s to 80s for art and culture, embodied the revolution. And Ghassan Kanafani was the epitome of the resistance writer. And I've actually heard Mahmoud Muna talking about him sort of barking down our throat. He's sort of like, what's expected, barking at our backs. Like, you know, what's kind of expected. It's this sort of standard that we all feel inclined to sort of aspire to. He was assassinated in Beirut by the Israelis in 1972, together with his niece. At that time, the revolution the revolution that embraced cultural output was influenced by the legacy of Marx, Trotsky, and the Fourth Internationale. The battle was then, as it is now, not just for land and freedom, but against erasure at every level, from buildings to documentary records, archives, libraries, and photographs. Physical erasure of the Palestinians by Israel has now reached the heights of high tech, including, it's recently been reported, the mystical erasure of WhatsApp accounts of those killed in Gaza, the last remnants of relatives' voices and messages being eradicated with their bodies. The banning of Palestinian artists at festivals, the refusals of venues to host events, the censoring of content, the sacking of editors and of magazines that call for ceasefire. This too is erasure, not as visual or as physical as the destruction of over 500 Palestinian villages in 1948 or the destruction of every university in Gaza and over 200 archaeological and cultural sites, but another outrageous affirmation that Palestinians are not, according to powerful narratives, supposed to exist. Literature becomes a tool among many others to be innovatively deployed to write people back into life. And Palestinian writers and artists are responding to their threatened erasure and eradication with eloquence, style, and fury. Their writing ranges from the visceral and explosive to the contained and reflective. For work in English, one eye could be seen to be turned to the powers in the West, urging them to recognize Palestinian humanity, presence, history, complexity, interiority. This approach of writing, intending to, quotes, inform the West, was one the Palestinian-born writer Soraya Antonius, who lived from 1932 to 2017, adopted in her novels of the 80s and then later questioned. Today, she wrote in 2001, I think that this was a rather colonisé reaction, implying as it did that Westerners were inherently godlike in their impartiality and that the injustice was born of misinformation. Style is not just a question of preference, but of circumstance. For those living under bombardment or occupation, or both, the short forms, and I'll refer you here to Nehru's Karmut in Gaza and Maha Abu Hayat in the West Bank, or the diary, Raja Shahada Atef Abu Saif, or the latter, Hussam Madhoun, can prevail. In exile, the Nakba generation, like my father, were frequently treated with incredulity when relating their history and identity. They wrote to recreate a destroyed world and took to their memoirs themes of exile, diaspora, and transit repeat for all Palestinians. For readers who feed off the delicacy, fine-tuning, and balance of a phrase, I would recommend the poets, not just Darwish, but also Samih al-Qasim and Mossab Abu Toha. Palestinian novelists outside Palestine write in styles that have been compared to the epic-like remit of Stendhal, referring here to Isabella Hamad's novels, or the spareness of Raymond Carver, Adoniya Shibli. The young essayist Enes Nusaybi's Namesake is a searing, contemplative account of, among other things, the microaggressions of racisms and Islamophobia experienced at a British university. Since the genocide in Gaza, a morbid genre of poems, probably unique, has emerged. Elegies anticipating writers' own deaths. Some call for no more than a grave, or to die in one piece, or not to wait for their own death for days under the rubble, as seen in these lines from a poem published on social media by Ibrahim al-Hula hours before he was killed in an airstrike, together with his wife and 5-month-old baby daughter. I don't want to end up in a bag, he writes with 2 exclamation marks. Everything is negotiable except for my death. I want a full shroud, 192 centimeters long. I don't want to give up any part of my body. I want it whole. It must not only be about death. Poet Rafif Ziada's We Teach Life, Sir goes to the heart of the battle. There is a desire pervading Palestinian writing to overcome destruction with humanity, community, family, and love. The urgency transmits. Palestinian literature refuses to accept that art is one thing and politics another. The fusion is as compelling as it is essential. In our tens and in our millions, as I say in demonstrations, we are all Palestinians. Thank you.
Thank you, Selma. And now journalist and author Sophie Haywood and novelist Rachel Connolly will read from Daybreak in Gaza.
So this is an extract from a war diary written by Hossam al-Madhoun. He's a child protection officer from Gaza. He works on humanitarian projects with psychosocial support through storytelling. And he's the co-founder of Theatre for Everybody. In this extract from his diary, he's been displaced to Rafah. And he and his theatre partner, Jamal Al-Razi, are trying to develop therapy programs for children. This is an extract from the 18th of February, 2024, so 1 year ago. Scarface. See yourself for a shekel. A boy in the market is holding a tiny piece of mirror, encouraging people to look at their faces for 1 shekel, about 25 US cents. He's making a living by offering a very rare service. I've not seen my face since I arrived in Rafah, many weeks ago now. You can't buy mirrors anymore. Anyway, a mirror's something you forget about in this situation. How you look does not matter. I ask him, do you make money this way? He tells me he does. A lot of people want to see themselves, he says. I make 30 shekels a day or more. But you see him? The boy points to a man down the street walking away from us. He looked at his face, but gave the mirror back to me without paying. I'm not stopping him, though. He had a cut from his face all the way down to his chest. A long, horrible cut, not healed well at all. I think it was from shrapnel. He looked at his big, ugly scar, and when he gave me back the mirror, I saw he was crying, so I let him go. I take the boy's mirror and look at my face. It's got very skinny. I have no mirror for shaving, so the stubble on my chin is all uneven, some bits longer than other bits. I'm a mess. I don't cry. I give the child 2 shekels and continue walking.
This is a sort of similar type of format, like it's an excerpt from a diary. This is by a young Palestinian called Nur al-Din Hajjaj. He was born in 1996. He was a writer from Gaza, and his novel, The Wings That Do Not Fly, came out in 2021. And in 2022, his first play, The Grey Ones, was performed on stage. My name is Nur al-Din Hajjaj. I am a Palestinian writer. I am 27 years old, and I have many dreams. I am not a number, and I do not consent to my death being passing news. Say too that I love life, happiness, freedom, children's laughter, the sea, coffee, writing, Farouz, everything that is joyful, though these things will all disappear in the space of a moment. One of my dreams is for my books and my writing to travel the world, for my pen to have wings that no unstamped passport or visa rejection can hold back. Another dream of mine is to have a small family, to have a little son who looks like me, and to tell him a bedtime story as I rock him in my arms. My greatest dream is that my country will have peace, that children will smile more brightly than the sun, that we will plant flowers in every place a bomb once fell, that we will trace out our freedom on every wall that has been destroyed, that war will finally leave us alone so we can, for once, live our lives. And I'm just going to read the last bit of his bio now. Nur was one of hundreds of people killed on the 2nd of December 2023 when Israeli warplanes bombed about 50 residential buildings in Gaza City.
Thanks so much, Sophie and Rachel. I'm going to welcome onto the stage the winner of the White Review Story Prize, Azad Bashir.
Thank you. I'll be reading from a short story I wrote last summer. It's the final section of the story. The story's called Will Heaven Fall Upon Us? When I took the stones from my eyes this morning, I saw the sky above, a hard crystal blue, endless, overwhelming. Around me, the school had disappeared, and with it my bedding, the shelves containing our belongings, even my yellow shirt. In the distance, I saw my mother approach. She walked slowly, placing her feet carefully on the uneven rubble. When she reached me, she spoke to me for the first time since I had died. Come, she said, and I stood up, placing my stones in my pocket and a sheet around my shoulders. We walked through empty, grey streets, and after a while, other mothers joined us, all of them wearing long black robes, all of them silent. The sky went on forever, and instead of the barbers, butchers, libraries, and hospitals, we saw tall, triangular structures, collapsed mountains of concrete. The world had become shattered, grey, alien, like the moon. Where was everyone? Where were the houses and where were the shops? Where was my father and where were my sisters? Above us, the sky was flat and unreal. It stretched around us. It pushed us into the ground. Would it fall upon us? After a while, one of the mothers whispered that she was looking for water. An empty plastic container she held hit her right leg with every step she took forward. She looked tired. Her skin was stretched tightly over her face. She said she didn't know where to look. I reached into my pocket and handed her a stone. She put it in her mouth and sucked on it gently. Then she swallowed it. Another mother then began to speak. She said she was looking for her sister's house, but the roads had disappeared and she didn't know which way to turn. There were low murmurs of agreement then amongst the women. It was hard to know where to go, they said. My mother then spoke. I think it's this way, she said, and though they were all looking for something different, they nodded. Yes, you're right, it's this way. I remember now, they said. My mother's body had become small, her face drooped, and something black oozed out the side of her mouth. She wiped it with the back of her hand. We were picking our way through the rubble of homes, through the terrifyingly broad expanse of what were once narrow alleyways, and I was going to ask my mother where we were going when we heard the dogs barking. The dogs were hungry and their hunger made them mad, so we began to run. One of the mothers tripped and fell. I took my last stone from my pocket and pelted the dog on her chest. I got it in the eye. It whimpered, it cried. The other dogs began to cry too. They hung back. They began to lick one another. Then they disappeared. We stopped for a moment to catch our breath. Ahead of us was a burnt car, and balanced on its boot was a large wooden container. I ran towards it and climbed inside. The mothers gathered around me, 2 on either side, and lifted me into the air, and they carried me, slowly, with panting breaths, towards the cemetery. I could see its black iron gates curving into the sky, hanging from 2 white pillars, like the bodies of the dead. "We're nearly there, just wait," my mother said, as the coffin began to shake. Soldiers had appeared around us, and they beat my mother's legs. My coffin wobbled, then plunged sharply from side to side. The soldiers hit my mother's arms and back. My mother's and the other mothers cried. My body crashed against the wooden sides of my coffin. The sky span. It pressed down on me. My body bounced. My head cracked against its wooden boards. When it passed through the gates of the cemetery, the mothers stopped. They put me down. I sat up and looked around. The cemetery gates stretched into the sky, but around me I saw only sand and earth. I asked, "Mother, where are the gravestones and where is my grave?" She shook her head. She did not know. "Mother," I asked, "where was the city and where were the people? Where was my father and where were my sisters?" Instead of answering me, my mother turned away. She lay down. She flattened herself on the floor. Where was the school and where were the teachers? I looked around me and I was alone. Where was my mother and where were the other mothers? Where did they go? Where were the dogs and where were the soldiers? Where were the birds and where was the sky? Where was the world? Thank you.
Thank you. And now, journalist and author Daniel Trilling.
Thanks, everyone. It's amazing to see so many people here in the room today and watching online. So I'm a journalist, and I spend a lot of my time as a journalist writing about fascism, why it's coming back, how we can stop it. And one of the reasons I do that is because at a young age, I read a book called The Periodic Table by Primo Levi. So The Periodic Table is a memoir of Primo Levi's life as an anti-fascist partisan in Italy in the 1930s, as a survivor of Auschwitz, but also of his profession as a chemist. And each chapter of the periodic table is themed on a different chemical element. The extract I'm going to read is from a story about studying at university in Turin in the late 1930s. So in 1938, in Italy, Mussolini introduced the racial laws, which imposed discrimination and segregation on Jews and Africans. And it included banning books by Jewish authors. So this very short extract is from the chapter Zinc. And it's set in the university laboratory classroom that Primo Levi was studying in at the time. The first day, it was my fate to be assigned the preparation of zinc sulfate. It shouldn't have been too difficult. It was a matter of making an elementary calculation and attacking the zinc particles with previously diluted sulfuric acid. Concentrate, crystallize, dry with the pump, wash and recrystallize. Zinc, zinco. They make tubs out of it for laundry. It is not an element which says much to the imagination. It is grey and its salts are colourless. It is not toxic, nor does it produce striking chromatic reactions. In short, it's a boring metal. It has been known to humanity for 2 or 3 centuries, so it's not a veteran covered with glory like copper, nor even one of those newly minted elements which are still surrounded with the glamour of their discovery. The lab assistant handed me my zinc. I returned to the bench and prepared to work. I felt curious and shy and vaguely annoyed, as when you reach 13 and must go to the temple to recite in Hebrew the bar mitzvah prayer before the rabbi. The moment, desired and feared, had come. The hour of the appointment with matter, the spirit's great antagonist, had struck. The ancient Greek word for matter is hule, which strangely can be found embalmed in the names of some chemicals, methyl, butyl, etc. There was no need to get from the lab assistant the other raw material, the partner of zinc, that is, sulfuric acid. It was there in abundance in every corner. Concentrated, of course, and you had to dilute it with water. But watch out. It is written in all the treatises, one must operate in reverse. That is, pour the acid in the water and not the other way round. Otherwise, that innocuous-looking oil is prone to wild rages. This is known even to children in secondary school. Then you put the zinc in the diluted acid. The course notes contained a detail which at first reading had escaped me, namely, that the so tender and delicate zinc, so yielding to acid which gulps it down in a single mouthful, behaves, however, in a very different fashion when it is very pure. Then it obstinately resists the attack. One could draw from this 2 conflicting philosophical conclusions. The praise of purity, which protects from evil like a coat of mail, or the praise of impurity, which gives rise to changes, in other words, to life. I discarded the first one, disgustingly moralistic, and I lingered to consider the second, which I found more congenial. In order for the wheel to turn, for life to be lived, impurities are needed, and the impurities of impurities in the soil, too, if it is to be fertile. Dissension, diversity, the grain of salt and mustard are needed. Fascism does not want them, forbids them, and that's why you're not a fascist. It wants everybody to be the same, and you are not. But immaculate virtue does not exist either, or if it exists, it is detestable. So take the solution of copper sulfate, which is in the shelf of reagents, add a drop of it to your sulfuric acid, and you'll see the reaction begin. The zinc wakes up, it is covered with a white fur of hydrogen bubbles, and there we are, the enchantment has taken place. You can leave it to its fate and take a stroll around the lab and see what's new and what the others are doing. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Daniel. I'd like to welcome on stage poet, translator, and scholar Atif Al-Shir.
Well, thank you so much, Mahmoud. Thank you so much, Leah, for all the dedication and organization of this wonderful event. We're witnessing very difficult times in Palestine. It's been awful for the last 14 months, but today is also very difficult in Gaza because Israel has just announced, if you saw the news, that they're going to stop all the humanitarian aid going into Gaza, and the situation has already been very dire. So I hope we'll all be continuing to protest, to write, to do whatever we can to stop this utter and incredible cruelty that Israel is imposing on the Palestinians. It's just appalling. I'm not going to talk about Palestinian literature because Salma has preceded me so ably to do that, so I'm just going to read a poem by Hiba Abu Nada, who was sadly killed in 2023 in Gaza, in her home in Khan Yunis. Israel dropped a bomb on her home and killed her. And I must mention, so many Palestinian poets have been targeted and killed, targeted deliberately with their families, such as Salim al-Nafar, Rifat al-Ara'ir, of course you know his name, If I Must Die, his poem is very well known, and so many others. So it's quite extraordinary that this culture, how much targeting Israel is imposing and causing such harm to it. And all they do is write poetry and express their emotions and their feelings and their desires, etc. So this is Hiba Abu Nada. We are in the Heights now. We are in the Heights now, teachers free of their crowded classrooms, their voices no longer shouting to be heard, new families without pain or sadness, journalists taking pictures of heaven, writing about the eternal love. All of them are from Gaza. There is a new Gaza in heaven, without siege taking shape now. This second poem I'm going to read, I wrote some time ago. It was actually in reaction to the pogrom that was done to the people of Hawara in Nablus. I adapted it slightly, changed it added a few lines and so on in light of what happened in Gaza, but it's pretty much the same. It's all been very severe violence. The title of the poem is They Prepare for Their Weddings. Those who die now from my country, with the sun on their faces and a horizon betraying them, those who die with the bullets of Israel and die with the promises of Israel, they die at the gathering of roads and from the weightless burden of the sky. They die in houses bereft of light, in hospitals emptied of cures. They die. Death visits them more than poetry. Hunger eats their children, and they prepare for their weddings under collapsed roofs, over dead bodies under the rubble. They die without mirrors and walk on roads unashamed of their narrowness. Those who die now from the youth of my country, they are without a doubt concealing in their bodies the barest sparks of a fire. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Atef. And now, writer and campaigner Natasha Walter.
Thank you so much. It's really such an honor to be asked to speak here today in solidarity with those criminalized for the dangerous acts of selling books and trading in ideas. I'm sure I'm not the only person in this room who has recently wondered if solidarity is even possible anymore, who looks at the crimes being committed now in Palestine and looks back at the long histories of dispossession and genocides and wonders whether the divisions are now too great and the pain too bitter to continue to put our faith in solidarity. But of course, if we give up on solidarity and empathy, we know what the future will look like. We can see that future being prophesied to us daily now by politicians and billionaires. So we know this isn't the time to give up, and I guess it's just still up to each of us to decide whether we're going to acquiesce in that bitter cycle of hate and division or stand up for values of humanity and solidarity in whatever ways we can, however small. And we know that literature and writers don't occupy some separate plane from the political world. We as writers, we're not always immune from lazy thinking and repeating dehumanizing patterns of thought. I'm a Jewish writer who grew up in a family marked by the trauma of the Holocaust, and I know that I too have in the past glossed over Israel's actions or averted my eyes from Palestinian experiences. But because we're not separate, because we're part of the political world, I think literature and writers do still have this potential power to possibly build connections, amplify ways of thinking that center empathy and solidarity. And we need to keep enlarging that place of possibility and to resist those who would shrink it or cancel it or censor it or criminalize it. So it's in the spirit of solidarity. I'm not going to keep on talking in my own voice. I'm just going to read two short poems, one by a Jewish woman and one by a Palestinian woman. Well, they speak for themselves. Both of them were written more than half a century ago, in the 1960s. I lived in the first century of world wars. Most mornings, I would be more or less insane. The newspapers would arrive with their careless stories. The news would pour out of various devices, interrupted by attempts to sell products to the unseen. I would call my friends on other devices. They would be more or less mad for similar reasons. Slowly, I would get to pen and paper and make my poems for others unseen and unborn. In the day, I would be reminded of those men and women, brave, setting up signals across vast distances, considering a nameless way of living, almost unimagined values. And as the light darkened, and as the lights of night brightened, we would try to imagine them and try to find each other, to construct peace, to make love, to reconcile waking with sleeping, ourselves with each other, ourselves with ourselves. We would try by any means to reach the limits of ourselves and to reach beyond ourselves, to let go the means, to wake. I lived in the first century of these wars. So that was written by Muriel Rukeyser back in 1968, and I think still speaks. And next, I chose a poem by Fadwa Tuqan, the Palestinian poet. This version is a translation by Naomi Shihab Nye, The Deluge and the Tree. When the hurricane swirled and spread its deluge of dark evil onto the good green land, they gloated. The western skies reverberated with joyous accounts. The tree has fallen, the great trunk is smashed, the hurricane leaves no life in the tree. Had the tree really fallen? Never. Not with our red streams flowing forever, not while the wine of our torn limbs feeds the thirsty roots, Arab roots alive, tunneling deep, deep into the land. When the tree rises up, the branches shall flourish green and fresh in the sun, and the laughter of the tree shall leaf beneath the sun, and birds shall return. Undoubtedly, the birds shall return. The birds shall return. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natasha. Now I want to welcome on stage Manal Masalha, who's going to tell us about her photography exhibition, which is over there in the bar. You'll be able to take a look during the interval. And she'll be the last speaker before the interval. We'll do a bit of housekeeping after she speaks.
I'm not going to be long, and I'm not going to be reading. Thank you, Mahmoud, and thank you, Nama, or Leah Nama, for organizing this event. And thank you, the audience, for being here. I know so many more who wanted to be here but couldn't because the event was sold out, which is, for me, is such a beautiful thing to experience in these dark, defining times, that people want to come, want to show solidarity, want to learn, and want to say that what is being done in Palestine is not in our name. And the slaughter that Israel is conducting is actually a slaughter on all of us, everywhere, anywhere. So thank you. I'm going to be just brief. My project is on Palestinian herders. I'm a photographer, I'm a sociologist. But before actually I talk about it, I want to mention the bookstore. I lived in Jerusalem for over 10 years. And the Educational Bookstore was actually one of the places to go to buy interesting literature from all over, but also Palestinian and some Israeli as well. And it was really awful to hear and to see that Israel raided the bookstore. But it wasn't actually surprising in a way. I mean, Daniel, you mentioned the Primo Levi. Primo Levi is actually one of my favorite writers, and he wrote, each era has its own fascism. And we are, unfortunately, living in a very scary way, this fascism, and we have to resist it because we owe it to the people of Palestine, we owe it to our children, we owe it to the world in a way. So those Palestinian herders, I came across them, like I documented them actually in 2021 when I was working for the UN at the time. And they are the most beautiful people, even physically, culturally. We have to be thankful to them for enduring and preserving like a culture which is at risk of vanishing. They live in caves, they live in harmony with their nature, but Israel's brutal occupation is not in harmony, neither with nature nor with people. One of the quotes that I have is by Rajesh Hadi, who's a lawyer turned writer like you. And he wrote in his book, Walks of Palestine, Notes on a Vanishing Landscape, about his love for walking in the hills of Ramallah and the hills of Palestine, or the occupied territory, actually, of 67, because he cannot visit Israel. And he had a conversation, I think, with one of the settlers in Dolev, if my memory does not betray me. And then he says, and what was done to the land by those who claim to love it? And really, like, what is happening there? How can they, like, go and butcher not only people, but olive trees, which are like thousands of years old? These are actually a heritage that belong to all of us. They should not belong to, they are not a private property, and they go and uproot them. I mean, this is a strong message of brutality, of violence, of slaughter, of darkness in a way. I speak Hebrew because I'm a Palestinian from Israel. I spent the last 18 months watching Al Jazeera for their proper reporting and listening to Israeli news. I can write a book on how to design fascist minds, how to dehumanize and justify the killing of innocent people. Little babies, they are terrorists in the making. Children who are detained in prison, they're referred to as terrorists. I wrote about those detainees or those captives or whatever we want to call them, who are children, whose future is totally and utterly destroyed. By what and what for? You know, like those, like, I really wonder what for. But that's why Naama and Mahmoud, thank you so much for organizing these events that break the walls of fear and hatred, because ultimately we are just people who want to live. And this is the message of the herders from Masafir Yatta. We just want to be left alone. We just want to live. We don't want, to be occupied, humiliated, displaced, murdered. Many of you watched probably No Other Land, and there is an encounter between the civil administrator and the man, one of the herders, and he told him, "You're wasting your time. We're not going anywhere. You're not going to displace us." And that's the message. We need to break down those walls of hatred and fear that keep us apart, because ultimately we are people. We do not choose our ethnicities, but we choose what we stand for. And these events do educate, but events alone do not work. We have also to use our power as citizens, as concerned citizens, as responsible citizens, and boycott. Just use our power purchase power, not by dates which are produced in the illegal settlements of Israel. And this is actually within international, accepted the humanitarian and the human rights law, which is being trampled upon. And this is also another reason why we need to have this fight for our humanity, for our children, for the future of this planet. Thank you very much. Sorry, there will be QR codes about are you going to say it or shall I say it?
You can say it.
Because I am in the center of the stage. Yeah, the money will go to the Hanoon Foundation, which Khalid will be speaking about, and to the bookstore, but there will be QR codes, so please do donate generously.
Yeah. As Manal said, donations have already been collected through the tickets to both the bookshop and the Hanoon Foundation, and these QR codes are for Hanoon. Khalid will speak. We're really lucky to have him with us about their work. We're going to have an interval now for 20 minutes. We will be kind of brutal with the timings, so get back a little ahead of that so that everyone's seated and we're ready to go. And just on the issue of dates, for anyone, I may have said it, but for anyone breaking their fast, there are already dates. It's at sunset, but just so you know, whenever you would like, and they're not from any places. We checked the provinces, so don't worry about that. Okay, see you after the break.
Author Michael Rosen.
Thanks very much. Thank you. In 2014, there was a headline in The Guardian that said, Israel bans radio advert about listing the names of children killed in Gaza. So I wrote, don't mention the children. Don't name the dead children. The people must not know the names of the dead children. The names of the children must be hidden. The children must be nameless. The children must leave this world having no names. No one must know the names of the dead children. No one must say the names of the dead children. No one must even think that the children have names. People must understand that it would be dangerous to know the names of the children. The people must be protected from knowing the names of the children. The names of the children could spread like wildfire. The people would not be safe if they knew the names of the children. Don't name the dead children, don't remember the dead children, don't think of the dead children, don't say dead children. Thank you. Our own Prime Minister said the people in Gaza lost their lives. That was careless of them. They must have been careless about where they were standing, or sitting, or sleeping. They didn't get out of the way. They were forgetful about health and safety, perhaps. Like walking out onto the road without looking, perhaps. He seems concerned. Maybe he hopes that they will get their lives back. Some kind person will hand them back to them, perhaps. Maybe he wonders where they lost them. Now that he's seen pictures of streets turned to rubble, maybe he thinks that they got lost underneath some bricks or slabs of concrete. This may, perhaps, lead him to wonder what it was that caused the buildings to fall. He must have found out by now that it wasn't an earthquake. Perhaps he wonders if it could have been anything like the London Blitz, an event we remember with horror and sadness. So why would anyone do such a thing today? Why would anyone use weapons against civilians so they end up losing their lives? Surely this would be something that our Prime Minister would think of with horror and sadness. But it seems not. It just seems to have happened because the people of Gaza were careless. Thousands and thousands of people were careless. So I give you the careless people of Gaza and the concerned Prime Minister of Great Britain. I saw on social media a phrase, it said, the Gaza Riviera, built on the bones of dead children. So I imagine someone, a tourist, going to Gaza, a Gaza in the future. The beach on the Med is soft and sandy. The airport nearby is cheap and handy. The clouds in the sky are far and few. It's cocktails time in a room with a view. It's always good to have ideas and plans, and no one here has blood on their hands. There are pics of old Gaza on the hotel wall. We bought an Arab rug in the shopping mall. We came out here for a wedding celebration. What we see is quality regeneration. It's always a good idea to have ideas and plans, and no one here has blood on their hands. The people here are doing things properly. I myself deal with land and property. I reckon this place is going to be great for people like me in real estate. It's always good to have ideas and plans, and no one here has blood on their hands. If you buy right now, you'll make a killing. Out at sea, they're going to start drilling. The clouds in the sky are far and few. It's time for cocktails in a room with a view. It's always good to have ideas and plans, and no one here has blood on their hands. Thank you. And I'll finish with this one. Now, here's a mystery. If you say from the river to the sea, they can lock you up, you or me. But if you say from the sea to the river, you can be the Israeli Prime Minister.
Thank you so much, Michael. I'd like to welcome now onto the stage playwright and commentator Ahmed Najal.
Thank you. Thanks for organizing this event, and thanks for everybody who's been involved in this, and thank you for coming. I want to begin with a conversation, one of the last I had with my grandmother, Sitti Nasra, when I last visited Gaza in 2021. She was witty and funny. She was a Nakba survivor. She carried our history in her bones, but by then she suffered from dementia and time had begun to blur for her. Let me tell you about the Mukhtar's land, she said, her eyes lighting up. It's like a garden of Jaffa. He grows everything, tomatoes, cucumbers, courgettes, but the real star is the melons. So sweet, they could make your taste buds sing. People from Najd and Bir Saba would set off on a full melon quest just to bring them home on their camels and mules. Then she lowered her voice as if letting me in on a secret. But do you know what else drew them to Hooge? Beside the melons, our women, she smiled. Tall, olive-skinned, with green eyes. I used to hear the men from Najd calling out as they arrived, sweet melons, sweet women, sweet melons, sweet women. But now our daughters are marrying outside Hooge, the new generation. They are just not as beautiful. She shook her head. You should marry somebody from Hooge. That was my grandmother, always full of stories, always tying history to the present, as if time was one and a broken thread. In December 2023, in the genocide in Gaza, an Israeli soldier walked into her room and shot her, one bullet in the leg and one bullet in the chest. They came for a bookshop. The Israeli attack on the Palestinian bookshop and arrest of its owners, Mahmoud and Ahmad, this was not a random act. of violence. It was a part of something far greater, far darker. A systematic erasure that has been unfolding for decades. Israel does not even acknowledge that a Palestinian nation exists, let alone recognize our culture, our history, our heritage. Heritage that stretches across centuries, from our stories to our sanctuaries. They have demolished hundreds of schools, universities, libraries, theaters, museums, and culture centers. They have flattened Gaza's institutions of learning and art in this genocide. And it's not collateral damage, it's deliberate. I know this erasure firsthand. In 1991, during the First Intifada, the Israeli army knocked on our door, back in the days when they still knocked. We were in the kitchen when we heard it, loud, aggressive. We did not need to see them to know. The Hebrew voices crackled through their walkie-talkies. My father, usually calm, suddenly bolted from his chair, but he did not run to the door. He ran to the living room. I was just a child, but I remember it clearly. His frantic hands grabbing a book from the coffee table and throwing it behind the wardrobe. It was a book of Ghassan Kanafani, a book of words, a book they feared. Days later, I asked him, "Why did you hide it?" His answer was simple: "We cannot let them see it." Even a book, just ink on paper, was something they feared. In school, we were never taught our own history. Imagine that. A nation that is not allowed to know itself. Instead, we studied histories of others. In Gaza, we studied Egyptian history, because to Israel, Palestine was not supposed to exist. But we resisted. After school, we gathered in secret to study Palestinian literature. We recited Mahmoud Darwish. We whispered our own stories to each other. And when the Israeli army raided our classroom, when they flooded the halls with tear gas, when they threatened our teacher, if you teach these children about Palestine, you will never see the light again. We did not stop learning. It wasn't just books. They came for everything that carried our identity. My mother, dressed on a Palestinian thobe, was once stopped by an Israeli soldier. He shouted at her aggressively, "Why not a black skirt and a white scarf?" Even our dance, Dabka, was something we had to hide. We kept the music low, the windows shut. We assigned somebody to stand watch for Israeli jeeps. If they came, we ran. This is not new. This was always their plan, to erase us. And I used to wonder why. Why this relentless need to erase a people? My grandfather once asked the same question as Israeli soldiers arrested my uncle Yusuf. He turned to a general and said, "Why do you do this to us? We welcomed you once. We were neighbors in Houj, my homeland, before you took it, before you renamed it." And the general answered with chilling honesty, "Because we can." But I tell you now, no matter what you can do, you will not erase us. We are not guests in this land. We are not pages you can rip from history. We are deeply rooted, so deep that our roots extend far beyond the ground beneath your feet. To uproot us, you would have to tear apart the very earth you stand on. And so we remain. We write, we teach, we dance, we carry our history in our voices, in our poems, in our steps, and we will never, ever disappear. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. And now, journalist and author Rachel Shabi.
Thank you, Mahmoud, for putting this together. And thank you all for being here in person or online with us. So when I was thinking about this short extract that I'm going to read, I was thinking about what it means when a Palestinian bookstore in occupied East Jerusalem is raided by Israeli police. And of course, it means the things that everyone else has been talking about. It means censorship. It means an attempt to erase Palestinian life and heritage and culture and history that has always been a part of Jerusalem. But it's also an attempt to erase a communal place, a community space, a meeting ground where many people come together. People come together on a basis of a shared humanity and on a basis of equity. And that's reflected in the shared humanity and the equity that's pouring out of so many books on those shelves. And it made me think about the work of writers in the 50s, among them Hannah Arendt and W.B. Du Bois, who were trying in that period to draw on the shared humanity, the collective themes that could be teased out of the experiences that they had just experienced at that time. Anti-Semitism and racism, the Holocaust and colonialism. Not to collapse them all into one thing, because you can't, because they're all very different, very specific things. But in order to try and understand how they are all connected, so that we can understand how humanity is connected, so that we can understand that the only way to fight all these forces is collectively and in solidarity. And so it's in that spirit that I want to read this short extract from Aimé Césaire, Discourse on Colonialism. He's a writer from Martinique. He's writing in the mid-50s about French colonialism. The they that he's talking about is obviously France, but also Christian Europe more widely. Okay. First, we must study how colonization works to de-civilize the colonizer, to brutalize him in the true sense of the word, to degrade him, to awaken him to buried instincts, to covetousness, violence, race hatred, and moral relativism. And we must show that each time a head is cut off or an eye is put out in Vietnam, and in France they accept the fact. Each time a little girl is raped, and in France they accept the fact. Each time a Madagascan is tortured, and in France they accept the fact. Civilization acquires another dead weight. A universal regression takes place. A gangrene sets in. A center of infection begins to spread. And that at the end of all these treaties that have been violated, all these lies that have been propagated, all these punitive expeditions that have been tolerated, all these prisoners that have been tied up and interrogated, all these patriots who have been tortured, at the end of all the racial pride that has been encouraged, all the boastfulness that has been displayed. I'm just trying to get the spotlight on this book. A poison has been distilled into the veins of Europe, and slowly but surely, the continent proceeds towards savagery. And then one fine day, the bourgeoisie is awakened by a terrific boomerang effect. The Gestapos are busy, the prisons fill up, the torturers standing around the racks invent, refine, discuss. People are surprised, they become indignant. They say, how strange, but never mind, it's Nazism, it will pass. And they wait, and they hope, and they hide the truth from themselves, that it is barbarism, the supreme barbarism, the crowning barbarism that sums up all the daily barbarisms that is Nazism. Yes, but before they were its victims, they were its accomplices, that they tolerated that Nazism before it was inflicted on them, that they absolved it, shut their eyes to it, legitimized it, because until then it had been applied only to non-European peoples, that they have cultivated that Nazism, that they are responsible for it, and that before engulfing the whole edifice of Western Christian civilization in its reddened waters, it oozes, seeps, and trickles from every crack. Yes, it would be worthwhile to study clinically, in detail, the steps taken by Hitler and Hitlerism, and to reveal to the very distinguished, very humanistic, very Christian bourgeois of the 20th century that without his being aware of it, he has a Hitler inside him, that Hitler inhabits him, that Hitler is his demon, that if he rails against him, he is being inconsistent, and that at bottom, what he cannot forgive Hitler for is not the crime in itself, the crime against man. It is not the humiliation of man as such. It is the crime against the white man, the humiliation of the white man, and the fact that he applied to Europe colonialist procedures, which until then had been reserved exclusively for the Arabs of Algeria, the quote mark coolies of India, and the quote mark N-word of Africa. And that is the great thing I hold against pseudo-humanism, that for too long it has diminished the rights of man, that its concept of those rights has been, and still is, narrow and fragmentary, incomplete and biased, and, all things considered, sordidly racist. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. I'd like to welcome onto the stage Professor Avi Schleim.
Thank you. I'm very grateful to Ahmad for inviting me to take part in this very powerful display of solidarity with the Educational Bookshop in Jerusalem. I'm a Jew and an Israeli, and my sympathies are entirely on the side of the Palestinians. I've just published a book called Genocide in Gaza, Israel's Long War on Palestine, and it's a collection of essays and with an epilogue, and this is my modest personal contribution to the struggle, to the fight against Zionist fascism backed by brutal and racist American imperialism against the people of Gaza and more broadly against the Palestinian people in general. But the organizers of this event asked me to talk not about my new book, but about my previous book, a kind of autobiography, Three Worlds, Memoirs of an Arab Jew. And the three worlds of the title are Baghdad, where We were a Jewish family where I lived from the age up to the age of 5. Then Ramat Gan, a town in Israel where I went to school from the age of 5 to 15, and London, where I went to school from the age of 15 to 18. And it's not a conventional autobiography. I like to think about it as an impersonal autobiography. The first half is about our life as Jews in an Arab country, and the second half is my own account of my childhood. My wife read the book chapter by chapter as I was writing it, and one day she said to me, "Avi, I'm very worried. I'm on chapter 5 and you weren't born yet." So I said to her, this is the whole point of the book. It's not just about me. It's an attempt to interweave a personal story which, with a much wider history of the Jews in Iraq, and to explain the exodus of the Jews from Iraq to Israel. And Palestinians don't feature in this book, as Selma Dabar, who very kindly wrote an endorsement for the book, pointed out. The reason for that is that up to the age of 18, I hadn't met any Palestinians. On the other hand, there is a long epilogue at the end of the book in which I trace the evolution of my thinking about Israel-Palestine down to the present day, down to today, where when I advocate the only democratic solution to this conflict, one state from the river to the sea with equal rights for all its citizens, regardless of religion and ethnicity. So I'm going to read to you the prologue, the opening scene of Three Worlds. One hot summer day, my father approached as I was hanging out with friends outside our block of flats in the Israeli town of Ramat Gan, east of Tel Aviv. Unlike my companions and me, in our shorts and sandals, my father wore a three-piece suit, a white shirt, and a tie. He addressed me in Arabic, a foreign tongue. My reply had to be in Arabic too. Shame overwhelmed me, and my cheeks turned red. Answers to my father's questions were muddled, monosyllabic, barely audible. What I wanted to say to him was that while it was all right for us to speak Arabic at home, when I was in company, he needed to speak to me in Hebrew. However, in the presence of my peers, I could not bring myself to say anything. Even later at home, I could not articulate these inhibitions. I just wanted the ground to open up and devour me. Difficulties in communicating were to characterize my relationship with my father for the rest of his life. As a child, I never considered how humiliating this incident must have been for him. This was the mid-1950s when I was about 10 years old. I had been born in Baghdad in 1945 to a Jewish family, 3 years before the birth of the State of Israel. My family had moved from Baghdad to Israel in 1950 when I was 5. At home, we spoke Arabic. The language of the young Jewish state was Hebrew, adapted for the modern age from biblical Hebrew. My sisters and I picked it up very quickly at school and spoke it both with our friends and with one another. My father, in his mid-50s, was still struggling to learn an immensely difficult language. It was only to be expected, therefore, that he would speak to me in Arabic. But for me, this was acutely, almost painfully embarrassing. Israel had been established by Jews from Europe and prided itself on being part of the West, of what was at the time commonly called the free world. It saw itself and it presented itself to the outside world as an island of democracy in a sea of authoritarianism. We were Jews from an Arab country that was still officially at war with Israel. European Jews tended to look down on us as socially and culturally inferior. They also despised the Arabic language and what they considered to be its strange guttural sounds. Not only was Arabic the language of the enemy, it was cast as ugly and primitive. An impressionable young boy, I picked up and internalized the beliefs and biases of my new environment. I wanted to turn my back on my Arab heritage, on the culture and customs of the diaspora, and to move into a Hebrew-speaking new Israeli. Speaking Arabic did not sit well with this new identity I was adopting. This seemingly minor episode encapsulates the emotional turmoil that plagued me throughout my childhood in Israel. Nor was it simply a matter of language. Switching from Arabic to Hebrew was only one dimension of the fundamental change that my parents, my two sisters, and I underwent following our arrival in Israel. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Schleim. And now we have surgeon and former chair of the Hanoon Foundation, Khaled Dawas, who will be talking a little bit about the Hanoon Foundation. Remember, the QR codes are still around if you haven't donated enough yet. Do you want to come up this way? Or just for safety, I feel with a surgeon. No, okay. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much. I've been told the microphone has to be very close, otherwise they can't hear you. In 1995, after 2 years of planning, the first medical school in Palestine was established. It was called, and it still is, the Al-Quds Medical School. Hence, the foundation of our institution called the Al-Quds Foundation for Medical Schools in Palestine, and that was established in the UK as a charity in 1997. Now, the school was based in Abu Dis, which is on the outskirts of Jerusalem, usually a 15-minute drive from the center of Jerusalem. But to get to it now, you have to have a tortuous journey, which is about an hour or more by bus through the infamous Kalandia checkpoint, which is more like a cattle pen rather than a checkpoint. And what stunned me when I first went there in 2016 or 17 was that as soon as you come out of the bus, the first thing that hits you is the wall, with the 6-meter-high wall, which is right on the edge of the university. So that's what you see as you come in and go out of the university. Since then, we've expanded to work with 4 medical schools, 2 in the West Bank and 2 in Gaza. And in 2023, in June of 2023, when I was in Gaza examining as an external examiner at one of the universities, our location was at the Turkish hospital. Now, some of you might know that Turkish hospital is in what's known as the Netzarim corridor. That became, in November 23, only 5 months after I left it, the Israeli army headquarters in that corridor. It's been partly destroyed, and it's one of the few hospitals which probably has a structure remaining. But during my time also in Gaza, in January of 2024, I met Samar. Samar is one of our students, one of our recipients of a scholarship, and she walked for an hour to come and find me in Deir el-Balah, to say to me that she wanted me to make sure that she finished her education and graduated as a doctor, and she was in her final year. I said I would do my best. 4 months later, in April, when I was back again in Gaza, she came to find me in the hospital, and in fact, she was working there as a volunteer. And it's people like Samar, who's now graduated, that we've been supporting for the last year and a half. She's been acting as a volunteer, but also studying, and the faculty of the university have somehow managed to reignite and rejuvenate this education system they had, and they've managed to graduate a cohort of their students. In addition to that, what we do is we buy equipment, we provide infrastructure, and as I say, we provide scholarships for students. And some of these students are now in the UK. Those who've been displaced and got out to Egypt have been coming over here. We've been supporting them, trying to get placements in the UK, in UK hospitals. But one of the things that sticks in my mind is when I went to Gaza at the beginning of my first trip in December 23, we asked the people there who had not seen any foreign doctors at that point, and we were one of the first teams that went in, what it is that they feel most worried about. And they said, we're worried about being forgotten. And it is this and the hope and the education that we invest in, which we would like you to invest in for us as well, please. So we are very thankful that you have come here today because you provide the hope that we are trying to pass on to them. And thank you very much, Nama and Namod, for what you've done. And thank you very much for investing in what we do.
Thank you, Khalid. I'd like to welcome onto the stage playwright Hannah Khalil.
Thank you. Thank you to the organisers. Thank you all for coming. I'm Hannah. I'm a Palestinian-Irish playwright. I'm going to read a tiny bit from my first play about Palestine, which is an allegory around 48, because we know that this didn't start 18 months ago. And in this story, a family live in a village, and a cousin comes and says, you need to leave. Bad things are coming. And they don't really believe him, but then a bomb drops in their garden. So they go and hide in the woods, and they watch their house to see what happens. And then the father goes to the house to collect some things, and when he comes back to the family in the forest, he says, we have to leave. And they say, why? And he won't tell them. So they leave, and as they're travelling, they stay with an old man. And this is an exchange he has with the old man while the family is sleeping. Bear with me, I played the trombone a bit here. Hold on. We'd been staying in the woods, and I went back to collect some things. I went in, and the house felt warm. The sun coming in the window. And as I closed the door, I had decided that this was all nonsense. I was going to go outside again and fetch my family, bring them back to the house, because this is madness. We can't be hiding from nothing. But then I noticed something, a new smell, something I didn't recognize. Not a smell of my house or of my family or of my people. And I walked into the kitchen, and that's where I saw it. There. Him. A man. Sat at my table, the one I made, smoking a cigarette with one foot on the chair. He'd just eaten something, and the plate was pushed away from him. He heard me come in, and he turned and looked at me. Looked right at me. He almost smiled. And then I thought he was going to get up. I could feel a scream rising in my throat. But he didn't get up. He turned away from me, leaned back in the chair, pulled on the cigarette, closed his eyes, and put his hands behind his head. He turned away from me, as if I wasn't there. In my chair, my plate, my table, my knife, my house. It was as if I didn't exist, as if I had never been born. A catastrophe. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. And now, author and dramatist Ahmed Massoud and writer, actor, and filmmaker Khalid Abdallah.
Thank you.
Palestinian by Ibrahim Nasrallah. I was silent and nothing came of it. I spoke and nothing came of it. I cursed, I apologized, and nothing came of it. I was busy, I pretended to be busy, and nothing. I sat, I walked, I ran, I shivered, and I warmed up. Nothing. I was parched until I cracked, I drank until I drowned, and nothing came of it. I crumbled like a fetus, like the father, the siblings, and the mother. I was then gathered in a shroud made of old curtains, and nothing came of it. I stumbled more than I could stand, but then I stood up, and nothing came of it. I prayed until, like a prophet, I became a verse in a holy book, and nothing came of it. I rode until I reached hell. I beseeched and begged, I raged and I calmed. I remembered what was once distant. I forgot what was always close, and nothing came of it. I befriended a monster and fought a monster. I died young and sometimes survived. In both times I grew old from all that I had seen, but nothing came of it. I charged, I withdrew, and nothing came of it. I fought the wind when it blew. I reconciled with the waves when I rose and raged among the horses. My heart was a horse. In the night, my heart was a knight, and nothing came of it. I ate, I hungered, I vomited, and nothing came of it. I embraced my shadow, and I chastised it, and then I chastised myself, and nothing came of it. I greeted a woman lost in the streets. I fought with a man and his smile nearby, and with a bird that sang briefly in the garden, and nothing came of it. I closed all the windows in my house and opened them. I wrote words on death when it is merciful, death when it is futile, death when it is hell, death when it is the only way, at last death when it is gentle and light, death when it is heavy and dark, and nothing came of it. I wrote about the river and the sea, about tomorrow and the sun, and nothing came of it. I wrote about oppression and depravity, purity too, and nothing came of it. I slept without a bite of bread. I dreamt without dreams. I woke up not missing my hands or feet or reflection in the mirror or the thing I call my soul. I died and lived. I lit myself afire. I put myself out with my own ashes, and nothing came of it. I am all these elements, O God. Fire, earth, wind, and water. Their fifth is a pain that blind songs can't see. Their sixth is this immense loneliness. And their seventh, since my slaughter, is blood. When I burned, I inhabited the letters of my free name like a butterfly. Palestine. Palestine. When my roof was suddenly blown off into the sky, and withered a wall, a window, and the youngest of my children, I gathered myself in the G and the A and the Z and the A. I became Gaza. 1,000 warplanes circled and hit me. I collapsed and collapsed again, and then it rose in a scream. I called out, but nothing came of it. Nothing came of it. Nothing. I lost faith and believed, and lost faith and believed again, and lost faith and believed, and nothing came of it. And the filthy world asks me to take all this. Why? That's translated by Hula Fakhreddin. I'm now going to read this declaration published in Haaretz on the 22nd of September, 1967. It was written by 12 Jewish visionaries in whose tradition and company and friendship and allyship and solidarity I feel I am in tonight. They took out a full page in Haaretz, in Hebrew, and wrote what in Hebrew are these 52 words from 1967. Our right to defend ourselves from extermination does not give us the right to oppress others. Occupation entails foreign rule. Foreign rule entails resistance. Resistance entails repression. Repression entails terror and counter-terror. The victims of terror are mostly innocent people. Holding on to the occupied territories will turn us into a nation of murderers and murder victims. Let us get out of the occupied territories immediately. And because I think it's essential to read the names of those 12 visionaries, it's signed Shimon Sabar, David Ehrenfeld, Dan Omer, Rauf Ilyes, Chaim Hanegbi, Uri Lipschitz, Dr. Moshe Makova, Eli Amanov, Rafi Zikroni, Ari Bober, Schnur Sherman, and Yehuza Rosenstrauch. This is a poem that I wrote. Last night, I had a dream. I saw the children of this genocide. They appeared not to me, but to everyone. They were neither above us nor below us, and all they wanted was to hold our hand. There were those of us who let our hands be held, and there were those of us who wouldn't. Somehow they all had dared to hope that anyone would take that hand, as any child would, yearning for safety. But orphaned in death, they had been abandoned once again by the living who haunt this world, some part of them already dead or deadened. And the surprise in those children's eyes was searing. A look that contained legacies. For they had spoken to the children of the Herero and Nama of Namibia, to the children of the Armenians. They had spoken to the children of Srebrenica, Rwanda, and Cambodia, and they had spoken to the children of the Holocaust, all of whom had told them that never again is now and always, even when it fails the living. Which is why, with each genocide, and this one in Palestine, they held out their hand to each other in the hope that someday they would reach the living who had chosen to die a different death. For in that hand that is always reaching out, the hand of the children of genocide, is life, is freedom, is justice. Surely you see that shimmering. And the future appears in the most peculiar of places. I want to thank Ahmad for holding this space and creating this space for us. Rachel, as you were speaking, I was immediately, it made it immediately clear to me that in the temporary closing of the Educational Bookshop, a space in which to gather was the creation of a space in which to gather. I don't know how it is that over this last 16 months, this is the first, please someone correct me if I'm wrong, but the first Jewish-held space in which we Arabs come in solidarity rather than what's so often the case the other way around. In this space, I feel the future that they were talking about, the tradition that was there in 1967 and I've known throughout my entire life. And we need each other profoundly. So I please let us do this again and again and more. Let this be the future that we know was in the past. Let us make it beautiful and irresistible. Because in all the beautiful soulfulness that I have witnessed in this room tonight, I know is that burning bright future that we will walk towards. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for all the writers and readers this evening. Thank you for the audience. Thank you to the people watching online. Thank you to the people in the room but having to watch online. But also, I absolutely endorse what Khalid has said. It feels to me incredibly moving both to hear what was being published in Haaretz in 1967, and also to think about that continuity and how we can take this forward. I'm really overwhelmed by what I've heard today. I mean, it's phenomenal. You're phenomenal. You're phenomenal. You also are phenomenal. And also many thanks to the team here who've been videoing, recording, dealt with the technical stuff, but also particular thanks to Nama, who has gathered all of these people.
And to Adam, whose brilliant idea this was. And to Dan Trilling for helping me a lot. So thank you, Adam and Daniel. It means the world to us that you're here. It means the world to us that you've participated. Like we said earlier, help yourself to dates, and the cafe is open and the bar is open and we're free to stay. So thanks a lot.